Hello and welcome to It's Just Not Fair, or Is It? I'm Nick Campbell, your host, and on our program this week we'll be looking at Jesus of Nazareth. What was it about him that made some people just scream, "It's just not fair!" While other people would think, maybe it is. Today we'll be looking at a report that begins, "And the report spread throughout the land." Even in that day, before the National Enquirer and the Drudge Report and YouTube, news could spread pretty quickly through the land if there was a bit of scandal attached to it. Any report of Jesus hanging out with undesirable people would be considered a scandal. Good, faithful people don't hang out with tax collectors and sinners. After all, we are known by the company we keep. Read any political report in the papers today, and you'll see that politicians want to be associated with the right kind of people, while their opponents try to smear them by associating with them with the wrong kind of people. Any report of Jesus making decisions that would embarrass an executive in an HMO or an insurance office would be considered a scandal. After all, they knew that business is about making money, not about providing a needed service. Those who can pay get better service than those who can't. Resources are limited, so they must be used so they can get the maximum effect. At least that's what they believe. Most of what Jesus did was considered scandalous in his day. People talked about what Jesus did and what he said and who he hung out with. The stories were so good that they weren't just whispered to neighbors over the backyard fence. They were collected and written down and then shared with others. Today we give those stories stained glass names like the Gospel according to Matthew. We seem to have lost that sense that what Jesus did in his day scandalized the society around him. That is probably because today we are more likely to mold Jesus into our image than we are to mold ourselves into the image of Jesus. And if we do that, then he's just one more commodity that needs to be sold as a product. Jesus didn't just do scandalous things, he consistently urged his followers to do the same scandalous things that he was doing. He would tell his disciples to do things like love one another, turn the other cheek, go the second mile, don't judge. It all sounded good and right, yet the world hears these things as ideals to be admired, but unrealistic when it comes to application in the real world. Jesus used one more trick to get his message out to the people. After all, he knew that we could set aside our principles, and we weren't always willing to take the risk that he took. So Jesus told stories that people would remember because, well, they were scandalous. Jesus told a special kind of story called a parable. One of the best definitions of a parable is that it's an imaginary garden with real toads in it. Too often, though, we try to turn parables into allegories, where each thing in the story represents something else, and it's our job to figure out what those other things are. Even the gospel writers tried turning some of the parables into allegories. After all, allegories teach valuable lessons. Turning a parable into an allegory does something else. It takes the scandal right out of the story. It turns it into a tale about morality, or about how we should act in certain situations, or about principles that we can apply to our lives. And while that is all well, it is not necessarily good. With allegories, we end up trying to save ourselves, which the gospel says we can't do. But Jesus can. In many of the parables that Jesus told, there is a less scandalous way to understand them and to make our peace with them. But there was one parable that Jesus told that is so scandalous that even today most people have real difficulty with it. Is the parable of the unjust steward. The parable then was the form that Jesus used to grab the people's attention. But since this particular parable seems to be so difficult for people to understand, I want to use another method to make the same point that Jesus was trying to make. I'll be borrowing a method that was around briefly in the late 1960s on some novelty records. A method that some serious church members might consider scandalous. So tell me, Jesus, in the grand scheme of things, what do you think of the Pharisees' plan to storm the gates of heaven by our good works, our good observance of the law, and our good intentions?
Bye-bye, boys.
Have fun storming the castle.
Think it'll work?
It would take a miracle. Bye-bye.
Why do you think it would take a miracle? Don't you think people are willing to work hard at keeping the law? Don't you think people care about getting into heaven?
The thing is, Bob, it's not that I'm lazy. It's that I just don't care.
That's an interesting point, but my name's not Bob. The Pharisees say that we must have integrity in our faith, and that will be pleasing to God. Is there anything you would like to say to the Pharisees about that?
Happy, smile. Sad, frown. Use the corresponding face for the corresponding emotion.
I see. So you're saying that not every emotion is godly, even if we act on it with integrity. It is reported that you have said that there's only one way to get into heaven. But aren't we all different? And wouldn't that suggest there may be many ways into heaven?
Yes! We're all different! I'm not.
Looking at your disciples, it's clear that they are different from the usual religious leaders, since they are fishermen and workers of the trades. What has been the reaction of the Pharisees concerning your selection of Matthew, the tax collector, as one of your disciples?
There's a touch of madness around here.
What seems to be their objection to Matthew and your other disciples?
You will never find the more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
That seems a bit harsh. You have taught that we are not to worry about the things of this world. How would you characterize the Pharisees' teaching about the relationship between heaven and worldly things?
I'm a little concerned right now about your salvation and stuff.
You recently were summoned to heal a little girl, but were delayed to heal a woman whom, according to many doctors, could not be healed. What was the reaction of the leader of the synagogue when he found out why you were delayed?
You have made me very angry indeed.
Did you and your disciple discuss the need for the delay? Tell our viewers what that conversation must have been like.
Edith, I am starting to think that maybe you don't believe in me.
I do believe in you. I just know you're going to fail.
I suppose that's the reason we don't see Edith's name on any list of the disciples. After the leader reacted so negatively to your delay, why did you then go on and heal the little girl?
Even the smallest person can change the course of the future.
Surely you don't mean that every person can change the future. That would be statistically impossible. As coolly and as logically as you can, is there any other reason for healing the little girl?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
But what if someone were really famous and they needed your help? Can you make a statement that will clear up your position about this?
Clearly, fame isn't everything.
If you keep on this course, Jesus, the Pharisees will have you arrested, or worse. Is this the only plan you have, to keep doing scandalous things?
I could tell I was in imminent danger of overplaying my hand. Casually, I switched tactics.
What is the reason for your change in tactics?
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
Are you sure you're communicating now? I'm puzzled by this recent story you told about an estate so big that the owner appointed a manager to oversee the accounts. If I heard it correctly, the manager was the best possible manager there could be. And it didn't take long before the manager knew that the people working the land couldn't return the full portion of what they owed to the master. And they all had excuses.
Excuse me.
Your story continues that over the years it became obvious that the master was not getting near the return that he should have been getting from the people working the land. Now I know in sports, when the team doesn't perform up to expectations, they fire the manager. And the people could have sworn that's what they heard the master say to the manager: either settle the accounts or you're fired. While some rabbis do argue that there can be forgiveness of our debts and sins, every good Pharisee knows that debts have to be paid or heads will roll.
Personally, I like the university. They gave us money and facilities. We didn't have to produce anything. You've never been out of college. You don't know what it's like out there. I've worked in the private sector. They expect results.
Wouldn't the manager be worried about his future?
This man is no ordinary man.
Your story continues with the manager calling in all the people who owed the master money, which was everyone.
How may I, in all humble servitude, be of assistance?
In your story, you say that the first debtor came in. The manager asked, "How much do you owe?" It was more than could be paid by this person, ever. In your story, the manager then said to this debtor, "Do your best, and I'll take care of the rest." And the debtor would leave praising the generosity of the owner who had provided a way for the debt to be paid. And this was repeated over and over again, with some paying more and some paying less, and many not being able to pay at all. To each account, the manager said, "Do your best, and I'll take care of the rest." And many of the workers praised the owner, from whom all blessings flow.
Oh, Magoo, you've done it again.
Now, Jesus, this is where the Pharisees are having trouble with your story. Sure, many of your people will now love the owner, which I suppose is your way of saying that forgiven people will love God. But this story all depends on the manager being able to take care of the rest, to pay the debt for others. You may not have noticed it, Jesus, but there is a lot of sin in this world. Surely only the people who have sinned the least will be covered by the manager's sacrifice. There must be some people who will be left out of this gracious offer, right?
Not nobody! Not no-how!
Do you think that this gracious offer will help the cause of God? And how we treat each other, even when God can't demand full payment from debtors?
Oh, boy. This family's come a long way from Transylvania, when we used to pound steaks into each other.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to the people today?
You see, we're on a mission from God.
The Pharisees believed that it was fair to reward the righteous and to condemn the sinner. But John Wesley pointed out the flaw in that thinking when he noted that all too often we look for people who have been starched and ironed who haven't been washed. If you don't know what starch and iron means, ask your grandparents. The scandal of Jesus is that he turned the worldview of the Pharisees upside down. We are not fresh out of the package. And all the starch and ironing won't hide that fact, that we need to be washed. First, we need to be washed by the waters of baptism and the blood of Jesus Christ. And then we can be starched and ironed. And by that I mean we can be made ready for living our lives in the kingdom of God. And since we can't do it by ourselves, Jesus does it for us. Is that fair? Not if you're a Pharisee. And it really isn't fair even if you're a disciple of Jesus Christ, but is gracious and loving and good. Well, our time has run out for this week. Join us again next week as we continue to consider Jesus of Nazareth.